No one questioned the trucking CEO when she rejected the same black single dad 7 times. They only questioned themselves when they finally learned who he really was. On a crisp Monday morning in downtown Nashville, the lobby of Whitmore Logistics shimmered with polished marble floors, towering glass walls, and the quiet confidence of a company that believed it controlled every mile of highway stretching across America. Employees hurried past carrying tablets, steaming coffee, and conversations about freight contracts worth millions of dollars. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Marcus Brooks stepped through the revolving doors wearing neatly pressed work boots, faded blue jeans, and a clean denim shirt that had been carefully ironed before sunrise by the only person whose opinion truly mattered to him. 8-year-old Ava Brooks had hugged him before school and whispered, "Maybe today is the day, Daddy." Marcus smiled at the memory as he straightened the worn folder containing his application. It was the 7th time he had come asking for nothing more than an opportunity to earn an honest living. The young receptionist recognized him immediately. Her polite smile carried the weight of sympathy. "Mr. Brooks."
"I'm sorry."
Marcus nodded gently. "I understand. I'd still appreciate 5 minutes if Ms. Whitmore has them." Minutes later, Claire Whitmore emerged from the executive elevator surrounded by senior managers. At 38, she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had spent years building one of the fastest-growing trucking companies in America. Her tailored charcoal suit, measured stride, and focused eyes left little room for interruption. She glanced at Marcus, then at the familiar folder in his hands. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly, "I believe we've already discussed this." Marcus answered with quiet respect. "Yes, ma'am. I was hoping circumstances might have changed." Claire barely slowed her pace. "They haven't." One manager offered an awkward smile before following her toward the boardroom. Another looked away entirely. Marcus remained standing without anger, without embarrassment, simply accepting the answer with a dignity that few people noticed anymore. "Thank you for your time," he said softly. Claire paused for the briefest moment before replying, "I wish you the best." Then she disappeared behind the heavy conference doors where decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars would soon be made. Marcus tucked the folder beneath his arm and walked back toward the exit. Outside, the autumn breeze carried the distant sound of diesel engines rolling along Interstate 40. He climbed into his aging pickup, started the engine on the second try, and smiled as Ava's handmade drawing fluttered against the dashboard. Beneath a picture of the two of them holding hands, she had written in careful crayon letters, "Never give up, Daddy." Marcus touched the drawing with gentle fingers before driving away, never noticing that inside the very building that had rejected him once again, the first invisible crack had already begun spreading through an empire that would soon need the one man it refused to see. Marcus drove across the Cumberland River with the windows cracked just enough to let the cool October air wash away the disappointment that had become almost familiar. Nashville traffic rolled steadily around him, tractor-trailers filling the interstate while morning sunlight reflected across polished chrome and faded paint alike. Every truck told a story Marcus often believed. Some carried groceries. Others carried furniture, medicine, or dreams packed carefully into cardboard boxes. To him, trucking had never been only about freight. It was about families waiting for someone to come home. He reached Oak Ridge Elementary 10 minutes before the afternoon dismissal bell. Like every weekday, he parked beneath the same maple tree near the playground and waited patiently with a paperback book resting on the steering wheel. Teachers smiled as they walked past because they knew him. Coach Daniels waved from across the parking lot. Mrs. Hernandez, Ava's third-grade teacher, approached with her usual warm smile. "She did wonderfully on her science presentation today," she said. Marcus's eyes brightened. "I knew she would. She practiced every evening after dinner." Mrs. Hernandez hesitated before adding, "She also told the class that her father fixes almost anything." Marcus laughed softly. "She gives me more credit than I deserve." "No," the teacher replied gently. "I think she simply sees you the way every child hopes to see a parent." A few moments later, the school doors burst open as children poured outside with backpacks bouncing behind them. Ava spotted the old pickup immediately. Her face lit up brighter than the afternoon sun as she sprinted across the sidewalk before slowing herself into a careful walk just as Marcus had taught her. Safety first, she reminded herself with a grin before wrapping both arms around his waist. How did it go? She asked quietly once they climbed into the truck. Marcus buckled her seat belt before answering. Not this time. Ava nodded without looking disappointed. Instead, she reached into her backpack and handed him a folded piece of notebook paper. Across the top she had written in careful handwriting, "Reasons my dad is already successful." Marcus unfolded it slowly. Number 1. He always keeps his promises. Number 2. He helps people even when they cannot pay. Number 3. He never quits. Number 4. He makes the best pancakes in Tennessee. Marcus laughed until tears almost reached his eyes. Well, he said, that fourth one is definitely the strongest argument. Ava giggled as they drove toward the small repair shop where Marcus worked part-time. The garage sat beside a busy freight corridor, and trucks stopped there almost every day with loose belts, stubborn brakes, overheated engines, or mysterious warning lights. The owner, Earl Thompson, greeted Marcus with a wave. Busy afternoon, Earl called. 3 rigs waiting already. Marcus rolled up his sleeves without complaint. While other mechanics rushed from one truck to another, Marcus moved with quiet patience, listening carefully to every engine before touching a single wrench. Veteran drivers often asked specifically for him because he never spoke down to anyone and never charged for work that did not need to be done. More than once he had quietly fixed small problems without adding them to the invoice because he knew an independent driver was trying to make enough money to cover a mortgage or a child's braces. That afternoon, an older driver named Frank climbed down from his 18-wheeler looking exhausted. Everybody else said, "I need a new transmission," Frank sighed. Marcus listened for less than 2 minutes before tightening a loose sensor connection no larger than his thumb. The engine settled into a smooth idle almost instantly. Frank stared in disbelief. "How much do I owe you?" Marcus wiped his hands on a shop towel and smiled. "Just promise me you will get some sleep before your next run." Frank shook his head slowly. "You should be running one of those big companies instead of fixing trucks out here." Marcus glanced toward the endless highway where hundreds of trailers disappeared beyond the horizon. "Sometimes," he answered quietly, "the road puts you exactly where somebody needs you most." The first signs were so small that almost no one inside Whitmore Logistics treated them as anything more than ordinary inconveniences. A delayed shipment outside Louisville. A refrigerated trailer outside Memphis reporting unexpected fuel consumption. A maintenance supervisor in Knoxville filing another routine report about engine warning lights that kept returning after repairs. Claire Whitmore reviewed the numbers from the top floor of headquarters with calm confidence. Every growing company faced occasional setbacks. That was simply the cost of moving thousands of loads across America every single week. Yet by the end of October, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Fuel expenses had climbed nearly 11% without any increase in mileage. Delivery windows that had once been met with remarkable precision began slipping by 30 minutes, then an hour, then longer. Customers who had praised the company for years quietly started asking uncomfortable questions during conference calls. Inside the operations center, dozens of giant digital screens glowed with moving maps, weather alerts, and live truck locations. Dispatchers spoke into headsets almost without stopping as phones rang from every direction. The room no longer sounded like a confident business. It sounded like people trying to outrun a problem they could not yet identify. During one executive meeting, the chief financial officer slid a thick report across the polished conference table. "Our maintenance costs are climbing faster than projected," he explained carefully. "Repairs are being completed, but the same mechanical issues keep returning." Claire studied the graphs without changing her expression. "Then replace the suppliers if necessary." The vice president of fleet operations cleared his throat. "We already did. The parts are not the issue." Silence settled over the room for several seconds before another executive spoke. "Perhaps the drivers are not following inspection procedures." Claire nodded once. "Increase compliance training. Audit every regional terminal. Everyone immediately began taking notes, but none of them looked convinced. Late that afternoon, one of Whitmore's veteran drivers named Carl Jensen eased his blue tractor into Earl Thompson's repair shop after noticing an unusual vibration beneath the steering column. Earl was finishing paperwork when Marcus walked over carrying a flashlight and a diagnostic tablet that had clearly seen years of honest use. "Tell me exactly what you felt," Marcus said. Carl described the symptoms while Marcus listened without interrupting. Instead of rushing beneath the truck, he walked around it twice, placing one hand against the side of the hood, as though listening to something deeper than sound. After several quiet minutes, Marcus tightened a mounting bracket that had shifted only a fraction of an inch, adjusted a software calibration inside the engine control module, and inspected several fuel delivery readings that most mechanics never bothered to compare. 20 minutes later, the vibration had disappeared completely. Carl climbed down from the cab, shaking his head in amazement. "3 different shops told me they could not figure that out." Marcus smiled modestly. Sometimes the smallest problem hides behind the biggest numbers. Carl looked thoughtfully at the Whitmore Company logo painted across the side of his trailer. "You ever work for them?" Marcus paused only briefly before answering. "I tried." Carl sensed there was more to the story but respected the silence. As the truck rolled back onto Interstate 40, running smoother than it had in weeks, Marcus returned to another waiting customer without another word. Hundreds of miles away, inside the executive offices overlooking Nashville, Claire stared through the glass walls at rows of company trucks leaving the terminal, unaware that the quiet mechanic she had turned away again and again had just solved in 20 minutes the very mystery her leadership team had been chasing for nearly a month. November settled across Tennessee with cold mornings, pale skies, and highways filled with thousands of trucks carrying everything from fresh produce to construction equipment. At Earl Thompson's repair shop, business grew busier every week, but Marcus never hurried. He believed machines, like people, revealed the truth only when someone took the time to listen. Before sunrise each morning, he dropped Ava off at the school breakfast program, kissed the top of her head, and reminded her to be kind to someone who looked lonely. Then he drove toward the garage while the first streaks of orange light stretched across the horizon. One chilly Wednesday afternoon, a white Whitmore logistics tractor rolled slowly into the lot, followed by another only 20 minutes later. Both drivers stepped out wearing the same worried expression. Earl looked toward Marcus with a tired grin. "Looks like your friends are back." Marcus smiled softly. "Everybody is welcome here." The first driver introduced himself as Daniel Morris. "Our maintenance department cannot figure this out," he admitted. "The truck runs perfectly for about 200 miles. Then the fuel economy drops and the warning system starts acting strange." Marcus listened without interrupting. He climbed into the cab, studied several readings, then quietly asked Daniel, "Has anyone updated the fleet software recently?" Daniel nodded. "Company-wide. About 6 weeks ago." Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he connected his diagnostic tablet, compared several operating patterns, then reached beneath the dashboard and adjusted a configuration that most technicians rarely noticed because it appeared completely normal during standard inspections. Less than 15 minutes later, the engine settled into an even rhythm. Marcus stepped down from the cab. "Take it for a 10-mile drive." Daniel returned 20 minutes later wearing a smile that almost made him look 10 years younger. "It is gone," he said. "The vibration, the hesitation, all of it." Marcus handed back the keys. "Keep an eye on it over the next few days. If it returns, come see me." Daniel reached for his wallet. Marcus gently raised a hand. "Your company already pays enough for repairs. Save your money for your family." Daniel stared for a moment before quietly putting the wallet away. As the afternoon continued, word traveled faster than anyone expected. Another Whitmore driver arrived before sunset after hearing about the repair over the company radio. Then another came the following morning. Within a week, truckers from different terminals had begun asking one another the same question at fuel stops across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. "Have you met the mechanic outside Nashville?" They did not know much about him. Some called him the quiet man with the old pickup. Others called him the father who always had a little girl waiting after school. A few simply referred to him as the mechanic who fixed what dealerships could not. Marcus never advertised his work, never posted videos online, and never asked anyone to recommend him. He simply greeted every driver with the same calm respect, whether they drove a brand new truck or one with more than 1,000,000 miles on the odometer. One Friday evening, Daniel submitted his maintenance report through Whitmore's internal system. Under technician comments, he typed only one sentence. Independent mechanic Marcus Brooks corrected in 15 minutes what 3 certified facilities could not identify. The report entered the company's database without attracting attention, one line among thousands processed every week. Yet deep inside the corporate servers, another nearly identical report had already arrived that morning, followed by a third before the day was over. Individually, they looked ordinary. Together, they were beginning to form a pattern that no spreadsheet could ignore for much longer. Monday morning arrived with freezing rain tapping softly against the glass walls of Whitmore Logistics headquarters. Inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere felt heavier than the weather outside. The weekly operations meeting had started an hour earlier, yet no one seemed eager to speak. Charts filled the massive display at the front of the room. Blue lines that had always climbed with quiet confidence were now bending downward. Fuel efficiency continued to decline. Repeat maintenance requests had nearly doubled. Customer satisfaction scores had begun slipping for the first time in years. Claire Whitmore folded her hands on the polished walnut table and studied every number without saying a word. Finally, she looked toward Victor Hale, the company's senior fleet engineering director, a gray-haired engineer who had spent more than 30 years studying heavy transportation systems. "Tell me something we have not already tried," she said calmly. Victor adjusted his glasses before opening a thick binder filled with maintenance reports collected from terminals across the southeast. "I stopped looking at repair invoices," he replied. "Instead, I started reading the comments written by our drivers." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And?" Victor slowly turned several pages until he reached a group of nearly identical reports submitted from different cities over the previous 2 weeks. "These drivers have never met each other," he explained. "Different routes, different trucks, different supervisors. Yet they all mention the same independent mechanic." He placed the binder in front of Claire. One sentence appeared again and again. "Marcus Brooks fixed in minutes what certified facilities could not diagnose." Another report read, "Marcus Brooks identified the software calibration issue immediately." A third simply stated, "Ask Marcus Brooks before replacing another part." The room grew noticeably quieter. Claire looked at the familiar name for several long seconds before speaking. Marcus Brooks. The words sounded strangely distant even to her own ears. Victor nodded. "I became curious." He connected his laptop to the conference screen. Several archived engineering documents appeared from nearly 9 years earlier, back when Whitmore Logistics had operated less than 100 trucks. "During our fleet modernization project," Victor continued, "an outside transportation systems consultant proposed a predictive maintenance model that could identify mechanical failures before they became expensive repairs." Claire stared at the faded presentation slide. The author's name appeared beneath the title in clear black letters. Marcus Elijah Brooks. Her heartbeat slowed. She remembered the name now, not from the engineering proposal itself, but from the application folder she had declined over and over again. Victor opened another file. His design was considered too ambitious at the time. We chose a cheaper software package instead. Another document appeared. Patent application. Intelligent Fleet Performance Monitoring Architecture. Primary inventor, Marcus Elijah Brooks. Victor looked around the silent room. Most of the diagnostic methods this gentleman described nearly a decade ago are now considered industry best practices. No one reached for a coffee cup. No one typed a note. Claire quietly leaned back in her chair, replaying 7 brief conversations that suddenly felt very different. She remembered his steady voice, his respectful smile, the worn folder he carried so carefully. She had assumed he was simply another applicant hoping for work. She had never once asked what was inside that folder. Outside the conference room, dozens of employees continued walking through bright hallways without realizing that the future of their company had just shifted. Claire closed the binder slowly, her fingers resting on Marcus Brooks's name a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked out across the rain-covered truck yard and whispered almost to herself, "Who exactly have I been turning away?" Claire Whitmore did not schedule an appointment. She did not send an assistant, a recruiter, or another executive carrying polished talking points. Early the next morning, she slipped behind the wheel of her own dark blue sport utility vehicle and drove across Nashville before sunrise, following the address printed on one of the maintenance reports. The city slowly awakened around her as coffee shops unlocked their doors and freight traffic gathered along the interstate. Nearly 40 minutes later, she pulled into the gravel parking lot outside Earl Thompson's repair shop. The building looked ordinary, weathered by decades of honest work, with faded paint, stacked tires, and the familiar scent of motor oil drifting through the crisp morning air. There were no polished marble floors here, no conference rooms, and no executives discussing quarterly forecasts. Only hardworking people preparing for another long day. Claire stepped out of her vehicle just as Earl rolled open the large service bay door. He looked at her expensive coat, then at the luxury vehicle parked beside rusted pickup trucks, immediately sensing she had never visited a place quite like this before. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. Claire offered a small smile. "I am looking for Marcus Brooks." Earl glanced toward the back of the garage before pointing silently. Marcus stood beside an aging 18-wheeler, sleeves rolled above his elbows, carefully showing a young apprentice how to inspect a worn air hose instead of simply replacing it. "Always understand why something failed before you decide how to fix it," he explained calmly. "Otherwise, you only solve today's problem." The apprentice nodded, listening with complete attention. Claire remained several feet away, unexpectedly reluctant to interrupt. She watched Marcus finish the lesson before he finally noticed her standing quietly beside the open bay. Recognition crossed his face immediately, yet there was no surprise, no resentment, and no bitterness. He simply wiped his hands with a clean shop towel and walked toward her with the same calm expression he had carried during every previous meeting. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," Claire replied. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Behind them, impact wrenches echoed through the garage while diesel engines idled outside waiting their turn. Then a cheerful voice broke the silence. "Daddy!" Ava came running from Earl's small office, carrying a bright yellow backpack. School had not started because of a teacher planning day, and Earl's wife had been watching her while Marcus worked. Ava wrapped her arms around her father before noticing Claire. "Hello," she said politely. Marcus smiled. "Ava, this is Ms. Whitmore." Ava extended her hand exactly as her father had taught her. "It is nice to meet you, ma'am." Claire gently shook the little girl's hand, caught off guard by her confidence and kindness. "It is very nice to meet you too." Ava looked proudly at her father. "Daddy says everybody deserves respect the first time you meet them." The simple sentence settled quietly between the adults. Claire felt her chest tighten in a way no board meeting had ever caused. She realized that despite rejecting Marcus again and again, he had never spoken poorly about her in front of the person he loved most. Ava skipped back inside after waving goodbye, leaving only the two adults standing beside the service bay. Claire looked around the modest garage, then back at Marcus. "I came because I finally realized I have been asking the wrong questions," she admitted softly. Marcus nodded with quiet understanding. "Sometimes," he answered, looking toward the endless line of waiting trucks beyond the open doors. "The right answers only appear after we stop assuming we already know them." Marcus invited Claire to a weathered wooden bench beside the garage while Earl quietly gave the mechanics extra work on the far side of the building, leaving the two of them alone with the distant sound of diesel engines and the occasional whistle of passing freight trains. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable to Claire, but peaceful to Marcus. Finally, she folded her hands together and looked directly at him. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not because of the reports or the engineering documents. I owe you one because I never truly saw you." Marcus listened without interrupting. Claire continued, her voice quieter than it had ever sounded inside a boardroom. Every time you came into my office, I assumed I already knew your story. I believed I was making efficient decisions. Looking back, I realized I was simply making quick ones. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly before answering. There is a difference. Claire nodded. I know that now. She reached into her leather portfolio and placed a neatly prepared folder on the bench between them. I want you to become our Director of Fleet Innovation. Complete authority over diagnostics, maintenance strategy, and system redesign. The compensation package is whatever you believe is fair. Marcus looked at the folder but made no effort to open it. Instead, he watched a young driver carefully backing a trailer into one of Earl's service bays. 7 times, he said quietly. Claire looked up. What? Marcus smiled gently, not with accusation but with reflection. I walked into your building 7 different times hoping someone might see potential instead of appearance. Every time I left with the same answer. Claire swallowed hard. I know. Marcus rested his hands on his knees. Those 7 mornings taught me something I could never have learned from a promotion. The breeze carried a few dry leaves across the gravel as Claire waited for him to continue. Respect cannot be offered only after someone becomes useful, Marcus said. Otherwise, it is not respect. It is negotiation. His words landed softly, yet Claire felt them more deeply than any criticism she had ever received. You are right, she admitted. I failed you. Marcus shook his head. No, Ms. Whitmore, you did not fail me. He glanced toward the office window where Ava sat coloring pictures beside Earl's wife. My daughter still believes that kindness is stronger than disappointment. I would rather protect that lesson than replace it with bitterness. Claire looked toward Ava as well. The little girl smiled at everyone who walked through the office door, completely unaware of the conversation unfolding outside. Then let me make this right, Claire pleaded. Marcus slowly slid the unopened folder back across the bench. I cannot accept your offer. Claire blinked in surprise. Not even after everything you have discovered? Marcus stood, brushing a little dust from his jeans before speaking. The title is generous. The salary is generous. But I have finally built a life where my worth is no longer measured by whether someone important chooses me. Claire remained seated, unable to answer. Marcus offered her the same calm smile he had worn every time he left her office. I sincerely hope your company succeeds, he said. America needs honest trucking companies. Families depend on them every day. But I also hope everyone inside those walls learns to notice people before they notice resumes. With that, Marcus returned to the waiting truck inside the garage, picked up his tools, and quietly resumed helping another driver whose only concern was getting home safely to his own family before the weekend began. While Claire remained alone on the old wooden bench holding an unopened future that suddenly felt far heavier than any contract she had ever signed. Claire returned to headquarters carrying the same leather portfolio she had taken to the repair shop, but the offer inside no longer mattered. What stayed with her instead were Ava's gentle words and Marcus's quiet reminder that respect offered only after someone becomes valuable is simply another transaction. The following week became the most difficult in the history of Whitmore Logistics. 2 national retailers informed the company that they were reviewing their shipping contracts because delivery reliability had continued to decline. Insurance costs increased after repeated mechanical failures forced unexpected roadside service calls. Every executive meeting ended with the same conclusion and no real solution. The board of directors demanded immediate action. Investors wanted answers. Employees whispered in hallways where confidence had once filled every conversation. Victor Hale entered Claire's office carrying another stack of reports. We have reached the point where temporary repairs are costing more than permanent solutions, he said quietly. Claire looked at the growing pile of maintenance records before asking the question she had avoided for days. If we do nothing? Victor answered honestly. Within 6 months we could lose drivers, customers, and the reputation that took 20 years to build. That evening Claire drove back to the small repair shop, but Marcus had already finished work. Earl smiled kindly as he pointed toward a neighborhood park a few blocks away. If he is not here after work, he is usually with Ava. Claire found them beneath tall oak trees where children laughed around a small playground while parents watched from nearby benches. Marcus sat beside Ava helping her assemble a model truck for a school engineering project. They looked completely content with a life that required very little to feel rich. Claire walked over slowly. Marcus stood and greeted her with the same quiet courtesy as always. Before she could speak, Ava smiled brightly.
Milisagon Widmurra.
Daddy says this truck has to carry the bridge without tipping over. Claire knelt beside the little project. That sounds important. Ava nodded seriously. If one part is weak, the whole thing stops working. Claire smiled sadly, realizing how closely the little girl's lesson resembled her own company. After Ava ran to join several children nearby, Claire turned back to Marcus. There was no folder in her hands this time, no prepared speech, and no executive confidence. I am not here to offer you a position, she said softly. I am here to ask for help. Marcus listened quietly. Not for me, Claire continued. For the families who depend on this company. More than 2,000 drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, warehouse workers, and office staff earn their living through Whitmore Logistics. If we fail, they carry the burden, not just the people sitting in boardrooms. Marcus remained silent as the laughter of children drifted across the park. Claire lowered her eyes before speaking again. I finally understand that leadership is not protecting a company. It is protecting the people inside it. Marcus looked toward Ava as she carefully helped a younger child who had dropped a handful of toy blocks into the grass. A gentle smile crossed his face. That is exactly what I hoped you would discover, he replied. After several thoughtful moments, he took a slow breath. I will help your company. Claire looked up with quiet relief, but Marcus gently raised one hand before she could thank him. On one condition. She nodded. Immediately. Anything. Marcus's voice remained calm. Every driver deserves preventive maintenance instead of emergency repairs. Every mechanic deserves proper training instead of impossible deadlines. And every employee's child who wants to study engineering or transportation should have access to a scholarship funded by the company. Claire did not hesitate. You have my word. Marcus extended his hand, not to accept a job, but to begin something built on dignity instead of pride. This time, when Claire shook his hand, she understood that the agreement they had just made was worth far more than any contract waiting on her office desk. Over the following months, change arrived quietly, just as Marcus believed lasting change always did. Instead of announcing sweeping reforms with expensive advertising campaigns, Whitmore Logistics began listening to the people who knew the roads best. Drivers were invited into planning meetings. Mechanics helped redesign maintenance schedules before problems became costly repairs. Dispatchers shared ideas that had gone unheard for years. Under Marcus's guidance, predictive maintenance replaced constant emergency repairs, fuel efficiency steadily improved, and trucks spent more time delivering freight than sitting inside repair bays. Customers noticed the difference before quarterly reports ever did. Deliveries became dependable again.
L'intime client renewed contract.
New partnerships followed. Yet the achievement Marcus valued most could not be measured on a financial statement. One crisp December afternoon, the company announced the Brooks Family Transportation Scholarship, providing educational opportunities each year for the children of drivers, mechanics, warehouse workers, and support staff who dreamed of building the future of American transportation. The first applause at the announcement did not come from executives. It came from employees who understood exactly what that opportunity could mean for their families. During the celebration, Claire stepped onto the small stage inside the operations center. Hundreds of employees filled the room, many wearing work boots instead of business shoes. She looked toward Marcus, who stood quietly beside the back wall, hoping to avoid attention as usual. Before today, Claire began. I believed leadership meant always having the right answers. I was wrong. Leadership begins by asking better questions and by seeing the value in people before the world tells you what they are worth. The room grew perfectly still. There is one person I need to thank publicly. She walked down from the stage instead of asking Marcus to come forward. Standing before him, she extended her hand. Thank you for teaching me that dignity cannot be hired after it has been ignored. Marcus accepted the handshake with the same quiet smile that had never changed. We all keep learning, he replied gently. Later that afternoon, as employees gathered outside to watch a newly restored fleet depart for its first holiday charity convoy, Ava stepped through the headquarters lobby holding her father's hand. She looked around with wide eyes before spotting Claire waiting near the entrance. Without hesitation, Claire knelt until they were eye level. Welcome, she said warmly. Ava smiled and reached for her hand. Together, the three of them walked through the front doors, not as strangers divided by titles or assumptions, but as people connected by trust earned one quiet choice at a time. Above them, trucks rolled steadily toward highways stretching across America, carrying more than freight. They carried a simple reminder that character often arrives without applause. Kindness rarely asks for recognition, and the strongest foundations are built not with power, but with respect freely given before anyone has to prove they deserve it.